All right, it's time to talk Cleveland Browns football on the Our Lads Football Network and the Prime Sports Network YouTube channel here. As anytime, of course, we talk Cleveland Browns football, that means Fred Greetham is here to join us from not only 247 Sports, but also you can check out his YouTube channel, the Orange and Brown Report. And we have a link in the description area for that. Fred, good to have you on the program once again.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me.
All
Looking
right,
forward
Fred.
to it.
Yeah, I mean it's unfortunate that we're talking now. I mean, a lot of Browns fans would have hoped that this would have been an opportunity for us to talk about the Browns Super Bowl in a couple of weeks, but uh, let's kind of put a wrap up to the season since I haven't talked to you obviously since then. Uh, because I was going over the offseason and the free agents and everything, and it's interesting because when you lose players during the season like Watson and Chubb, it's an every week thing, and you just roll with it. And are you going to replace him and are you not? And then all of a sudden when you do replace him successfully and the team goes on this run, it's almost like it's not that it's forgotten, but it's like, hey, maybe this is a team of destiny or something. Maybe we can actually make a run and do something, maybe not win a Super Bowl, but do something special. And then when it all goes apart really fast, and then you get reminded and you look back and you go, yeah, wait a second, yeah, they got beat up by Houston, but yeah, they didn't have Deshaun Watson, they didn't have Nick Chubb. This wasn't a team that was really that ready as maybe we thought they were. How disappointing was that result? And are there a certain amount of changes that you think need to be made from that result in the playoffs, or are they going to look back at the entire season and say, you know what, we care more about how we responded to the season than just one football game?
Yeah, I think they're looking at the big picture. I mean, before the season, I don't know if I did a prediction on this show, but I wrote my prediction as we always do season. I had the Browns 11-6 making the playoffs. Well, they finished 11-6 and they made the playoffs. But if you would have told me they would have been missing Nick Chubb, Deshaun Watson, would start five different quarterbacks,
Yeah.
their three top tackles. They had 12 prominent players, maybe not to everybody else, but people that followed the team that played big roles in the offense and defense, ended on injury reserve. 15 didn't play in the final game of the year, the playoffs. So if you'd have told me that's what would have happened, I would have never picked them 11-6. So when you look at that, you're saying, wow, they really kind of overachieved or played beyond their means. And I really think it's a testament to the roster that I was talking about. It was the best roster I'd ever covered. And you had a lot of role players, guys that never played, step up and play well. But with that all being said, it was disappointing because when Nick Chubb goes down in the second quarter of the second game, you felt like everything that was on the line, you might be able to make the playoffs, but how can you ever go and win the Super Bowl without your best player
Yep.
or your at least second best player? And then Deshaun Watson gets hurt. And even though, he came back, it was a start stop. Every time he got going and it looked like he was ready to turn the corner, injury was discovered and he was finally shut down after a tremendous game. A lot of people don't even realize he was 14 for 14 in the second half and led the Browns in a comeback victory over the Ravens, which
Yeah.
really was their last regular season loss if you don't count the game they rested everybody at the end of the year. And Watson had a broken bone in his shoulder and he had a high ankle sprain. Both those he played the entire second half.
Wow.
And so you just felt like, well, this team might be able to limp into the playoffs, but they're not going to do anything because you had a rookie quarterback in Dorian Thompson Robinson that was a little overwhelmed whenever he got thrown in there unfairly. And PJ Walker really wasn't much,
Yeah.
much of an answer. So you had a great defense. They were number one for most of the season, depending on what stats you look at. But you felt like, okay, if you could ride the defense and the offense just doesn't screw things up, because there was games earlier in the year that they could have won, but the offense, particularly the quarterback, screwed things up. And so the formula was just that. Okay, how far can you go with the Trent Dilfer Ravens model, or the,
Yeah,
like Nick Foles a couple years ago or whatever? But then Joe Flacco comes off the couch. Nobody expects much from him. And he inserted more offense in the last 5, 6 games than what they had seen really all year, arguably. And once he got going, you felt like, why not this team? Because there's really nobody established themselves as a dominant team in the AFC. At that time, the Chiefs were limping along, the Bills were limping along. Teams you thought were going to be good weren't really good, like the Chargers and Broncos, and and then you had beaten the Ravens, and you might have beat them twice, but you threw a rookie out there the first time.
sure.
And so, all things being said, maybe Joe Flacco could be one of these storybook rides.
Yeah,
It was anyway. But then it all came to an abrupt halt. I think most everybody assumed they would beat the Texans, and it was going to be this clandestine trip to Baltimore for Joe Flacco to return back to the team that they might build a statue for him and play against them.
yeah,
And then that came to an abrupt halt. So I think that realistically it could have happened, but I think most Browns fans that watch it closely felt like, well, this is great, but how in the world can you go into this without all these key guys? There's a reason they get paid 10, 15, 20 million or
that's
more,
right.
as opposed to the guy getting, minimum wage. Not saying there's that much of a difference, but there is a difference.
There
And
is.
so I just think that the biggest danger for the Browns is to think, look, we're set. We just need the guys back and then we'll be good. And they haven't taken that approach. They made some significant changes on the offensive coaching staff. They let go their offensive coordinator, their running back coach, and their tight ends coach. And they brought in the Alabama offensive coordinator to be the tight ends coach, a young up and coming Tommy Rees. They brought in Deuce Staley, who is
Yeah,
up and coming running back coach, and just hired Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator over the weekend. That one seemed like a little flat because without, I know he played with the Browns and I covered him. He wasn't very good, but sometimes you just then you watch the coaching and you're like, okay, he gets fired mid-season with the
yeah,
Bills, and then they seemingly turned it around.
yeah, yeah.
Well, then I did a deeper dig, and their offense actually was better under Dorsey. They won, they scored more points at the end, and a lot of it, there was other circumstances. But when I realized he worked with Cam Newton in his best year, a mobile quarterback, he was MVP, and then you had you know, actually Josh Allen emerged under him early in his career. And the testimonies that Cam Newton gave and so forth, I can see why they hired him,
Okay.
because they have not had a quarterback coach or an offensive coordinator specifically working with Watson's skill set. And they
Okay.
realize it's really is, and like I said, the maybe the silver lining is for them not to sit back and think, well, we'll get all these guys back and we'll be fine. So they made changes on the offense. That really was the problem, because the defense played so well all year,
Sure.
and the special teams. But because they got blown out by CJ Stroud down in Houston, I think that's going to be a craw in Jim Schwartz's offseason to drive them to figure out what went wrong and to fix that, because that really was not at all what we had
Yeah.
seen all year. And so I think there are some blessings that they can take from that. But I think really it's all about the offense. And they do have big questions because Nick Chubb, as you know, that's a major, major
Oh,
injury.
yeah, yeah.
And he had two big surgeries. He was off to a great start. He had 170 yards in 5.5 quarters and was averaging 6.1 a carry. In his career, he's averaged over 5 yards a carry. And there's no question in my mind, as hard as the guy works and everything, that he'll be back. They said he'll be back at some point next year. But what kind of Nick Chubb are you going to get?
Yes.
Are you going to get
Yes.
a 2.8 carry Nick Chubb, or the guy you had?
Yeah.
And he's got a $15 million salary for his final year with the Browns, and it's not guaranteed at all.
Oh,
They're going to do what's right with him. Andrew Berry even said, I look for them to do something like they did with Jack Conklin. Jack Conklin last year, before the season ended, had a season ending injury, and they signed him to a short term extension.
okay.
They restructured, gave him guaranteed money up front. And so I think that's what they'll do
Okay.
with Chubb, is sign him to a 2 or 3 year extension with guaranteed money up front. And because they don't want him, his last carry with the Browns, to just be that, Minka Fitzpatrick taking his knee out. And
Sure.
so I just think that, that's a question, though. You don't really know. So how do you plan? You're not going to likely have Kareem Hunt back. He just kind of came in after Chubb got hurt. He's a free agent. But you got Jerome Ford, who, played pretty well. But I don't know if he's your bell cow. He didn't average, you know, anywhere like Chubb did. He did 4.0. And so they have decisions to make there. And so I just think that it made sense to really revamp and look at their offensive staff. They know that ultimately they're not going to go where they want to go without Deshaun Watson playing at an
Sure.
elite level. And I think with Alex Van Pelt here, he had been here the first 2 years with Watson, and we hadn't seen anything significant change. And so I just think they wanted some new ideas. But this is a little different than the defense, where Kevin Stefanski says, okay, Jim Schwartz, you're in charge, and it's his defense. This is Kevin Stefanski's offense, and you're bringing guys in to work with it. It's not like Ken Dorsey, I do not think, is coming in here and saying, okay, this is my offense, I'm
Sure.
coming in. He's kind of fitting into what's already there.
Yeah.
We're looking for a fresh look. What can we do to unlock this offense with Deshaun Watson? Because you saw what Joe Flacco did, and frankly, Watson has everything that
Yeah.
Flacco has, the arm, but he has mobility.
Sure.
So why can't you be? Watson didn't have a 300-yard game passing. Flacco had 5 out of the 6 games he played. He was the only quarterback to throw for 300 yards, and he came off his couch throwing for 300 yards.
Yeah.
So you're like going, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I think this has caused them to really take a hard look. Why can't we run? And Stump Mitchell made some comments after he was released. He said the Browns can actually run the same offense they did with Joe Flacco. They just have to, tune it a little bit and get, Watson more to be thinking vertical and deep instead of taking off running all the time. So,
Who
we'll
calls the
see what
plays?
happens there. What's that?
Who calls the plays?
Well, Kevin Stefanski
Okay.
had for the 4 years. And so that's, to me, seems to be kind of the main thing for an offensive coordinator. Alex Van Pelt never called the plays except that playoff game in Pittsburgh when Kevin Stefanski had COVID and he had to stay home. And they put up 45, 48 points in that game. A lot of people thought, okay, year 2, it'll be Van Pelt. But he seemed to be content just collaborating, and they did all talk and so it really didn't matter, I don't think, who called the plays. But a lot of people in Cleveland want Stefanski to give that up. I think the Browns and a lot of experts think that's one of the things he does best, because when they've had faults on offense, it hasn't really been because of the plays he's called. It's
Okay.
been more the execution, and so forth. But
Okay.
it's interesting because Stefanski has really brought out the best in maybe the non-elite quarterback. Case Keenum had like arguably the best year of his career with Minnesota
Yeah.
on Keenum, and Cousins did pretty well, got going up there. And then when he came here, Baker Mayfield might have had the best year of his career in 2020 when they went to the playoffs. And then then he had Jacoby Brissett, who had a great year. And Joe Flacco really looked different than he did prior to, joining the Browns. And so, it is, you didn't get a big enough sample size with Watson because it's like you saw it get going and then he's silent, and then get
Yeah,
going.
that was annoying. Yeah.
So it's hard to, he's going into the third year of that big contract, and he's only played 11 games.
Uh,
And so you really don't have a big enough sample size. You've seen glimpses, but that they're all committed, you know. But I think they realized that the biggest mistake is we didn't have a quarterback that could step in when he went down. I think it was naive to trade Josh Dobbs, even though he wasn't maybe what Joe Flacco turned out. But if you'd have had an experienced quarterback like Joe Flacco, I can think of at least two games they wouldn't have lost, and they were still 11-6.
yes.
They didn't try to win the last game, so I think they could have challenged the Ravens for the division with just some subtleties there because they had the defense and the team. They just didn't have the quarterback play.
I'll tell you what. Let's before we go over free agency and the draft early look at it. I'm just going to post up. This is the Ourlads updated depth chart, of course, the best depth charts in the biz. So you can check them out here. I'll be referencing this throughout our conversation. And then we'll have a link in the description for this as well. And then also, I'm just going to post up what we'll be talking about here in just a sec. And that is free agency. This is the over the cap free agency list for the Cleveland Browns that we're going to go over too. So let's start first of all with quarterback. So does Joe Flacco come back as the backup?
I think they do want him back. It's obviously too early. He doesn't know. He wants to play. And when you saw his play, it's really hard to believe that nobody even called the guy. I didn't follow
I
him.
think some of it had to do with the fact that because he was playing with the Jets, but the Jets' offensive line made him look worse than he really was, and he needed a little bit more protection and a little bit more semblance. The Browns are a little bit more structured than the Jets' offense over the past few years, and I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, I was witness in the second game of the 2022 season when the Browns blew they were had 30-17 with less than 2 minutes to go after the 2-minute warning.
Yes.
And they blew a coverage, and Flacco threw an 84-yard dime to Corey Davis.
Yeah.
And then he threw the touch. They got the onside kick and won 31-30, hit Garrett Wilson with another great. And you're like, that was the last I saw him. And then I saw that he got benched and they went with Zach Wilson. I got it, that they wanted the young guy and stuff. But then, I never really followed it, that I thought he retired or something. And then when he got here, he said, yeah, I was out in the yard throwing passes to my kids and I thought I could still play, but nobody called. He never got a call at all until the Browns called him after Watson was put on injured reserve to come in and have a tryout. And it was on November 20th. They signed him to the practice squad. And he said, this is the first time I've ever had a tryout, and it was just, his story. But he's very thankful to the Browns for the opportunity. He loved it here. He thought he was going to be reviled, and yet he was treated extreme. He was like he couldn't go anywhere without, being the toast of the town.
Yep.
And I really think he appreciates it. His kids appreciate it because they knew who he was. They never remembered him playing when they were babies.
No.
Baltimore. And so, all things being equal, I think if his best opportunity is a backup, it would be come back to Cleveland.
Absolutely.
He knows he's coming back here, to be a backup. But I don't know. Brissett, they wanted him back, but he was offered $8 million to go to Washington, and I think he thought he was going to be the starter. And then they decided to go with Sam Howell, or even if it was maybe it was thought it was going to be competition. He thought he could win that. So all things being equal, he doesn't know. The Browns don't know.
Okay.
I just can't see a team saying, Joe, we want you to be our starting quarterback. He's not Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
He's 39, but a lot of teams would like him maybe as a backup or to mentor a young quarterback or something like that. and it all things being equal, he might say, "Well, yeah, I'll take that because there'll be a better chance to play." I don't know, but I
Okay.
think I the general manager is on record saying they would like him back, and I'm sure. And Kevin Stefanski said they had a very, very good exit meeting. So I don't know what'll happen, and somebody could just blow it away and say, "Well, we don't have the quarterback right now." I would think whoever doesn't have a quarterback would be looking to draft one. If and in today's world, usually that means they play, right off the bat.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think that it's going to be a money thing or something like that. He truly has enough money.
Sure.
He said he hadn't even checked his bank account to see if he got
Must be
paid.
nice.
Yeah, when you add things up there, but he's in a different stage of his life. He tells stories, and he said, like his 11-year-old, would um, is really into football, and he'd get home, go to the hotel, and his son would, "How come you didn't throw it to Elijah Moore? I mean, he's on my fantasy, Dad. You got to be kidding me, or something like that."
Yeah.
You could
It's a
just
different
see
time.
why he's relishing this so much.
Absolutely.
And when his kids are all into it, they're all buying Browns gear or they're asking for it for Christmas. When that's your arch rival that he played with and made his career with, so it's just was a great story.
Yeah.
But I think that if they can't get him back, they will definitely try to get somebody that's been there, done that, and not turn it over to, because now Dorian Thompson Robinson, the plan all along was to draft him, let him sit a year, and then be the backup. But then he didn't really get to play, or he got hurt a couple times. So you really don't know what you have in
Sure.
him. And I don't think you can do that again, go into the season with Deshaun Watson and Thompson Robinson. I think they learned their lesson the hard way by not having somebody ready to step in.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of Joe Flacco's out there, or Brownings, or even Dobbs. But Dobbs, as you can see, this is the difference between backups and starters. There are some backups that are good in spot roles, but the longer you play, the more the warts come out. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, this guy's not a starter. He's just a backup that's being thrust into a starter's role. But yeah, it's not easy to find. And when you can get somebody like the Browns did in Flacco, hopefully, if you're a Browns fan, I'm sure you want him back. Taking a look at the rest of the team, you mentioned Hunt looking like, I guess he's not coming back, and with the injury to Chubb, as you mentioned, it does look like that's going to be a position that they'll want to upgrade. Do you think they probably do it more in the draft? And by the way, how is the draft capital looking this year for the Browns?
Well, this is the last year of the Watson trade that they don't have a first round. So
Okay.
this is the third straight year without a first round. Their first pick's in the second round. It's lower. I don't know exactly. I think it's about 55th overall, somewhere in there.
Okay.
They, but no, last year they traded their second round pick for Elijah Moore, thinking he would be the guy. And he had a pretty nice year. He had 59 catches, but I don't know if he really exploded on the scene the way they wanted him to, or the way it looked like he was going to in the preseason and training camp. But I do think wide receivers at the top of the list. It's been Andrew Berry's MO. He has drafted a wide receiver in all 3 years. Everyone, though, was in the third round. Anthony Schwartz, the speed guy, they moved on from him this year. Then David Bell had a had spots where he showed some clutch in the playoffs and so forth. And Cedric Tillman probably showed the most promise. He ended the year, didn't play in the playoffs, had a concussion. So I think they realize you got it for this team, for this offense now, you need to get somebody that's ready to help right now. They were hoping Marquise Goodwin would be that guy to stretch the field. He ended up only with 4 catches. One of them was 57 yards. That was really the only bomb he was able to catch all year, and that was from Flacco. He had 67 yards, so 57 came on 1 catch. I don't think he'll be back. He had a lot of physical problems throughout the year, had a concussion. He missed like 6 games. But they traded Peoples Jones, and I think that they really need somebody opposite Amari Cooper. And if Moore could even if Moore's not the two, if he could even be the slot or the three, that would be ideal. Than to count on Tillman being ready. I don't know, but I can see that more in a draft, but not the guy they really need. Andrew Berry traded for Amari Cooper and he traded for Elijah Moore. I think that that would be the target they would look for, is try to find an overpriced guy under, in the rookie contract, something
Okay.
like Moore, or were the Cowboys. I mean, I don't know why they let go of Amari Cooper for a fifth round pick, other than because of his 20 million. I
Sure.
realize that, but that doesn't concern the Browns. They are geniuses at restructuring and figuring out how to, you know, extend it down the road. I can't explain it all, but
Yeah.
we have a cap specialist who is in sync with Barry. Almost everything they do, it's exactly what he says they'll probably do, even down to who they signed in free agency, because he said the key is Jimmy Haslam will spend the cash up front. He's spending over 50 million more than any other team in cash up front, meaning like, okay, Amari Cooper's due 23 million. They'll give him 15 million right now and restructure or something like
Yeah.
that. And it they get that 23 million back, in structuring. They did that last year with, to give you an example, Watson, we all know his major contract. It's 64 million for this year. They
Okay.
will restructure, and they can restructure and save 33 million in cap space just by restructuring him. And
Okay.
it's built into their contracts. When they sign with the Browns, they can restructure. They don't have to even get permission from the player. They talk to him and the agent, but they restructure,
Okay.
and that's how they've been able to continually, um, do some of the things. When you like right now, it says they're 19 million over the cap. Well, that's all on paper, and
Yeah.
all teams do it,
Yeah.
but you do kick the can down the road. But as I understand it, it's because the owner's willing to give the cash up front and and get relief on the salary cap side of it.
Well, that's why at this day and age, you do need to have an owner that has a lot of money and is really, really invested in seeing his team win, because this is what it takes. Just you got to spend. And it,
So I will, to finish that, they haven't been that active in free agency at wide receiver, because if you've seen, even the guys that might not be Pro Bowlers are getting major contracts. They kind of get shot out of the water. I think like a T Higgins would be a prime target for the Browns, because you're hurting the Bengals and you're
sure.
helping them. But if he gets to free agency, he'll probably go. Somebody will offer him way more than what, and break it. So they've been pretty good at the under the radar. They come back in and they get the 1 year deals with the Marquise Goodwins and guys like that. But I think that if he can you make a trade, you get the guy. It's just a matter of money usually. And the reason some teams, let him go is because of the money.
Yeah.
But if they're still under contract in their final year, that's when you can go get the guy and not give up the, if you're willing to pay the money or redo his contract, just like they did with Zadarius Smith and, guys like that. They traded for him instead of letting them hit the free agent market where you're kind of in a bidding war.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. So we'll definitely look out for that. More of a trade for a wide receiver than the draft, especially when they have a couple of good young receivers anyway that you want to see develop. So you can only have so many of those guys in your rotation. All right, so then do you also believe the running back situation, is that more of a veteran or something that they'll look at in the draft?
Well, I said, the elephant in the room is the Nick Chubb thing, because ideally you want him. I think they're comfortable with Jerome Ford showing, he rushed
Yeah.
for 800 yards and he caught 44 passes. So he's a dual threat. But I think you want more than that. They do like Pierre Strong. They traded for him right at the final roster cut down with the Patriots. And he was their third leading rusher. I think he had 261 yards. He's still under control, under contract. So right now you would have Ford and Strong. Hunt, they didn't re-sign him last year when he was a free agent. Like I said, nobody signed him. He's sitting at home. He lives here in Cleveland. He's from here. He's a feel-good story. Nick Chubb gets hurt, so like his best friend. They call him. He comes in and plays on Sunday after not going through training camp or anything with anybody. And he was just a really workhorse, but a short yardage runner. I mean, he
Yeah.
had 11 touchdowns for him, 9 rushing, but most of them were his longest run of the year was 16 yards. So I doubt if they'll re-sign him. He's even said so much that he's looking at free agency. I
Okay.
don't know if he's going to have a market, but I think the Browns know he's probably going to be available. Um, but I think they will. I don't think they'll go free agency route because again, that although running backs have kind of been the one market that hasn't got the big contracts, a guy like Zach Moss, something like that, because the Colts committed to Jonathan Taylor, he might become available, or somebody even, But then you're kind of painting the picture to Nick Chubb, that we're replacing you. So I really don't know what they're going to do. It could be, they got Jerome Ford in the fifth round, and that seems to be a trend with running backs too. They might definitely look to they've drafted two. They drafted Demetric Felton in the sixth or seventh round, so I can see them adding another quarter or a running back lower in the draft,
Makes sense.
cheaper under first contract, and some of those guys, emerge. To be honest, if Nick Chubb wouldn't have been drafted by John Dorsey and been here with the Browns, I doubt if this regime would have drafted him in the second round.
Okay.
They seem to be more of the analytics committee, of get two or three guys in the fourth, fifth, sixth round and, kind of shuffle the deck as you see going on in the NFL. But I mean, Nick Chubb has emerged as such a great back. I mean, he's such a
Yeah.
good story and such a good teammate. And what's unfortunate, he was on track, if he stayed with the Browns, to break Jim Brown's record. Now, he would have had to play like 4 or 5 more years healthy, and then he gets hurt in the second game. So that's the big question. I think they look at they know they got to get a little more depth there for sure because they're smart enough to know they can't just count on Nick Chubb
Yeah.
being the back he was.
All right. As far as the receivers, so of course, Njoku has the breakout year. Bryant, the number two, is a free agent. And you mentioned, of course, Moore at wide receiver. He'll be a free agent in 25. Tillman. By the way, how did Tillman play? Do they still have hope that Tillman could be a big impact player for the team?
Yeah, one of the reasons they traded Peoples Jones because they were freeing up time for Tillman. He did get hurt and missed some time, but in the time he was playing, he was starting to really go up and make contested catches. That's what they drafted him for,
Yep.
and physical. And he did have some big plays for him. Unfortunately, he didn't get to play in the playoff game or down the stretch. I think he had 21 catches, something like that, and um, he did show. Yeah, he averaged over 11 yards a catch, and I think they have high hopes for him. I think of the guys they've drafted, he would have the highest ceiling, obviously more than Anthony Schwartz. They let him go.
Absolutely.
And David Bell seems to be kind of a possession type guy, great hands, doesn't have great speed, but Tillman has size, strength, and seems to be able to get open. So I just don't know if they're going to be able to project that he's ready to go, um, as in the top three, or if you can go get another bona fide,
Sure. Veteran. Yeah.
guy veteran that can step right in because Amari Cooper just showed how strong he is, and he did that a lot of times, and he was really the only threat other than Njoku.
Yep.
And like you said, Njoku had a major breakout season.
And getting back to tight end, then, do you think the team will resign Bryant?
Well, Bryant was going into his last year, and our salary guy said he wouldn't make the team. And I think that's true. They went to him and said, we're going to restructure your deal. You take a pay cut, but we'll give you some guarantee. He had player escalations in 2023 that would have paid him like 2.8 million. So I think he got like a million or a million and a half by redoing it, but it was guaranteed,
Okay.
like I was saying before. So with that said, they showed they weren't really willing to extend him long term, but I wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back on a 1 year deal. They do that a lot with guys they don't think are going to be highly sought after. But if they feel now again, Bryant, you know, was key in their blocking and he wasn't as much of a receiver as maybe you thought when he came in, but they draft him in the fourth round, and they have a few guys like that. I don't see them signing him to a big year deal. They signed Jordan Akins as a free agent to a 2 year deal. So that was the thinking, is that let Bryant walk and Akins would be in the second year. Now Akins didn't do a whole lot this year, so I don't know if their thinking's changed, but
Okay.
I can see Bryant coming back, but he's not going to get a big deal. I think that he was willing to stay here. He's familiar, comfortable, and that's partly why I think they were able to keep him, because they reduced his contract and he said, "Oh, okay, I'll take it."
So do you think if they re-sign Bryant, they'll go come back with the same three next year?
Yeah,
Okay.
they may draft one again to develop, thinking that Akins might not be, and he's going into his final year. Um, but yeah, they had a couple on the practice squad that they've kept around for a couple years, so I have to think they have some hopes and some. They have a converted basketball player that's been on the practice squad for a couple years, and so
Okay.
yeah, I see them, looking at that position because Dorsey likes tight ends, and Stefanski's always liked tight ends. So I wouldn't be surprised with a draft pick there.
All right. Now, offensive line. Posich. We talked about that story with the whole Nick Harris thing last offseason. So Posich, once again, solid season. And you take a look at Petonio and Teller, and the Browns look pretty set in the interior of that offensive line. And as you mentioned before, and it's no, everybody knows by now that the tackles, the injured situation that the Browns dealt with was outside a tackle. But let's start with Willis, because Willis even went into the season like he still needed to prove his first round status, and it didn't look like he was doing that even before the injury. And then you take a look also at Conklin. At least he's still playing well when he's healthy. So are they hoping and are they expecting Conklin to come back? And Dwan Jones obviously played well, it looked like, as a rookie before his injury. So how do you think they go into this offseason at tackle with those three in particular?
Well, they do have three. They do have some decisions to make there because first off, Jedrick Wills, they picked up his 5th year option, so next year he'll be back at 15 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of the custom of Andrew Berry, even though a lot of Browns fans that watch him and say, man, he doesn't do anything. And, it's a head scratcher because Bill Callahan is regarded to be the best in the business. He wanted Wills. And there's some other tackles in that draft that really have played well. And Wills was taken with the 10th pick. And I think part of the reason is until you got something better, you don't just move on. So this allows them to look at him this year and then next year and still evaluate. But then, like you said, he got hurt. So this year was kind of a wash, and now he's coming off of knee surgery. Now they threw a guy in, Garen Christian, who was off the street. Nobody really even knew who he was, and he started like the last 6, 7 games at left tackle. Um, and you didn't hear a lot of problems there. And so here's a guy who's just kind of, getting a practice squad type minimum
Yeah.
NFL contract. So it makes you wonder what they're going to do there. A lot of people thought DeJuan Jones could be swapped over to the left tackle, and would he be better than Jedrick Wills? Because you had Conklin. Well, then Conklin obviously was lost to start the season, first game. Jones steps in and makes the all rookie team, playing really well at right tackle, and then he gets hurt. So you have your top three tackles finish the year on injury reserve. So now Jack Conklin coming off another major injury, but they had just signed him, to, like I said, an extension where they gave him guaranteed money. And now what do you do with him? It wouldn't make sense necessarily to stick DeJuan Jones back on the bench when you got a 22, 23-year-old future
Yep.
guy and you're putting, Conklin back out there. And then you have Wills on the other side. So do you make the switch or do you flip flop Jones to left tackle and try Wills at right tackle? He came out of Alabama as a right tackle and
Yeah.
they flipped him, so they have decisions to make. But I think one of the things is with Jack Conklin, because of the contract, he's owed a lot of guaranteed money. They might have to just eat it or try to redo something. I don't know all the going into the weeds on
Sure.
that, but um, I think the jury's still out long term on Jedrick Wills. But they like DeJuan Jones. I think he's shown enough. I think he's definitely going to be a starting tackle, whether it's right or left. But if you are planning on paying Wills 15 million next year, I think you would probably leave him at left tackle. So that will be interesting to see how they do. The biggest candidate I've heard about, like getting cut would be Wyatt Teller because he's got a big contract, 15, 16 million. And although he ends up ironically the only offensive lineman that played every game this year. And so that in their minds, that might not even be under consideration. Maybe it's a restructure or something, but I know that Batonio got the big extension and all this money on the offensive line. You felt like there needed to be some sacrifices. They do have guys on that have backed them up that they might feel could step in, like you mentioned, Nick Harris.
Yeah.
You know, instead of cutting him when Posick was signed, they let him play out his final year with the Browns, and he's listed as their starting fullback. He played the last half of the year as the blocking fullback,
Okay.
and then when Batonio went down, he stepped in there at guard. When Posick, he stepped in at center. He's pretty valuable in their minds, so I can see them keeping him. So I'm not speculating they're going to let anybody go, but keep an eye. If they were to do anything, it could be at right guard with Teller, but it just depends on how they look at the money and the guys behind them.
Okay.
They're pretty good with those things.
And so pretty much that's going to be handled on the team where it doesn't look like they're going to need to do anything outside the team when I'm talking about the tackles. So pretty much they're good there. It's just a matter of we just don't know where these guys are fitting. Right tackle,
Well,
left tackle, who's on the bench,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
you know, I think the first year Andrew Berry was here, he drafted James Hudson, a tackle, in the fourth round, and this was his fourth year. So I think he becomes a free agent.
Yep.
And I don't know if he really established himself. In other words, they drafted DeJuan Jones, and DeJuan Jones immediately went ahead of Hudson.
Yes.
But Hudson finished the year by default as the right tackle because of all the injuries. So I don't know if they think he played well enough to try to keep him around. Um, there was other guys. There was Alex Leatherwood, who was a former first round pick on their practice squad all year, and a veteran Ty Nasecki who was on the practice squad, and Justin Murray and Leroy Watson. But they signed that Garen Christian and put him in the starting lineup immediately.
Yeah.
And they didn't replace Hudson or either of these guys with any of them other guys that were on the practice squad or on the team. So you really don't know what they're thinking long term with any of these guys. But I have to think Hudson, they had to feel that he wasn't what they wanted because he didn't move into a starting role.
Sure.
I think originally they thought he would maybe take over for Conklin, but they ended up extending Conklin. So that told me they're not ready to give it to Hudson. And then, like I said, Conklin gets hurt this year, and they go right to DeJuan Jones, a rookie, immediately in the second game. So
Okay. Now let's switch over to defense. And on the defensive side, you take a look at as good as an edge combo as you're going to get with Garrett and Smith. Now, Smith is a free agent. So what do you think is going to go on there?
Well, Andrew Berry acquired him in a trade with the Vikings. He was still under contract, but again, they worked that with the idea that Smith wanted to be a free agent. And so he agreed to the trade and they restructured his deal that it would be 1 year. Now, everything I'm told, he really likes it here with the Browns
Okay.
and, and likes the whole rapport. He came on really at the end of the year and with sacks, but all year the Jim Schwartz raved about him, his play. It didn't, he kept going on and on, even with Garrett, that it doesn't matter about sacks. You guys watch the sacks. It's what are they doing in disrupting plays
Yeah.
and so forth. And they really valued him high. And Okoronkwo as well. Now, he finished the season with a torn pec and sat out and then played in the playoff game. And he needed surgery. So I'm sure he's had surgery by now. So I think they'll try to keep Smith. But when they signed Okoronkwo, kind of, I think, a 3-year deal, I think it was the idea he would be the edge, opposite Garrett. So they're not in a world of hurt if they can't keep Smith. I think it would be if another team blows them away and
Okay.
like Jadavian Clowney is kind of a mercenary. He goes 1 year, 1 year, and I think some of these guys do that as well. I don't know Smith. He got traded to the Browns. I don't know if he'll say, all right, I'll come back to the Browns because I like what's going on here, or he'll go to the highest bidder,
Yep.
or what. But with his numbers, they might not look and say, well, gee, he got 5 sacks. He might fall into that case like the Justin Houstons, the Jerry Hughes, the guys every year that are sitting around at the end of free agency and they end up signing a 1-year deal with some team.
Okay.
So if he's in that mode, I think they have a good chance bringing him back. They like Alex Wright. He
They do.
he had arthroscopic knee surgery in the preseason and didn't come back till earlier in the year. And he finally got into the rotation. And he actually, after having no sacks as a rookie, he had like 5 straight games, to end near the end of the season. And he really looked like a bona fide, rotational player. So they might think highly enough of him to not be as aggressive with Zadarius Smith or whatever. But Jim Schwartz is the driving force, no question. I give him the credit, and I give Andrew Berry for listening of bringing in those defensive linemen because on the inside, they were the worst running defense in the NFL. They brought in Dalvin Tomlinson, Maurice Hurst, and Shelby Harris to go with Jordan Elliott, and they were right up near the top in stopping the run until near the end of the year. I think they finished 11th, but still going from the bottom to the top.
Absolutely.
They were stopping the run, and so I think they will make a push if they cannot retain the guys they have that they want, like Maurice Hurst, Shelby Harris, Zadarius Smith. They will definitely look for 1-year stop gaps with guys like that are on the market. But Hurst has already said he really wants to stay. So again, it comes down to money and what other teams offer them. But most of those guys got those 1-year prove
Yep.
it contracts. And so unless they showed something with the Browns that another team just said, we got to get this guy, I think all things being equal, they'd have a good chance to bring some of them back. But what's happened with, as you've seen, most of those defensive linemen and other positions, they get in their 30s and they're 1 year contracts and they kind of sit around. Some wait until an injury. Like the Browns brought in Shelby Harris after an injury in training camp, and he was one of their better defensive tackles. So I don't know what kind of game they'll play, if they'll just try to lock them up or just let them go and see what turns up.
What about McGuire, the rookie? I know he didn't play much, under 100 snaps, but do they like his future?
Yeah, he had a sack late in the year, and I think that was a testament to having a strong defensive line,
Sure.
which you haven't had to see with the Browns in recent years. In other words, when you're drafting a guy in the third or fourth round, they were immediate starters, or they were the first guy off the bench because they were so weak. Siaki Ika, third round pick from Baylor, was a run stopper, and he was the same thing. He really never got on the field, until like late in the year when they rested their starters against the Bengals in the final game. He got to play the whole game. And so he was inactive almost every game, and McGuire was too. But I had heard some, Schwartz said some good things about McGuire, and he got to play when Okoronkwo got hurt. And I think the good thing is it allowed Ika and McGuire to be developed behind Zadarius Smith and Miles Garrett and on the inside those other guys. So they saw really the difference between where they were at and where those guys were at. So I do think they're high on them, but I
Okay.
think it's a good thing that they didn't have to play them that much. And they, like an Alex Wright, to me was night and day this year than he was last year, his
Yes.
rookie year. It was like he got it, and I think that could happen with some of these guys. It'll depend. You'll see if they don't go that aggressive at defensive tackles
Yep.
or defensive ends, thinking we got McGuire and we got Ika, you know, and
And
they're
right. Yep.
lower picks, so they don't have big contracts. So they're pretty good at that. And this is the first time now under Andrew Berry, you're starting to see developmental guys that maybe the outside world never heard of.
Yes.
And they let a guy go, and you go, how in the world could you let that guy go?
Yeah.
And then a guy you hadn't heard of steps
That's
up.
it.
Steelers did that for years. I mean, as a fan, I'd watch, and they had what I think Mike Wallace and a guy named Antonio Brown. You're going, Mike Wallace is awesome. And then they let him go, and you're like, who's Antonio Brown?
Yeah. Right.
I've never heard of the guy.
Yeah.
And then forget the off field, but
Right.
you're like, whoa, they know. And they
Yeah.
did that for years with linebackers. They'd let go of a Pro Bowler when his contract was up, and they'd put in a guy you never heard of,
Sure.
and he'd be a Pro Bowler. And that's what the good teams
That's
do
right.
is have a guy on their roster, and they go, this guy's ready to. I think the Chiefs did that last year. They had Juan Thornhill. The Browns got him, but he said they drafted a guy, and I don't even remember his name, but he stepped in and he knew he was going to be a free agent because they were going to move on
Yep.
and go with the young guy. So, that's what you want to have happen. And it hasn't happened that much with the Browns, but I think they feel good about the young guys. I think on the defensive line, they'll probably draft again, guys, because Jim Schwartz is so heavy on that. He wants to play like 9 defensive linemen in
Absolutely.
the rotation.
Yes. All right. Let's go to linebacker because the three guys are strong, but 2 of them are free agents. So, what about bringing back Walker and Takataki?
Well, Walker, for the second year in a row, finished on injury reserve or finished with an injury. Um, and he's been kind of a leader in the locker room, very, high spoken, well respected. Because of his injury history, I don't think he was really offered much last year. I remember one other team called him and he went in for a visit. I think his best shot of returning would be to the Browns, and I think he knows that. Um, it was a very team friendly 1 year, prove it type deal.
Sure.
And when you're not in that demand, you probably can do that.
Yep.
Taki a year ago was a free agent, but he tore his ACL in like the end of the season, so it was the worst thing for a free agent. I felt like the Browns kind of had him. He didn't really have an option much to show. The Browns signed him. I think they would like to keep him, and I think that he would like to stay here. Again, if another team blows him away,
Sure.
you might see some of these guys getting signed before if they really think there's going to be interest out there. But again, what they've done is pretty much let them go out and test the market and match it or something like that. But I do think that they would like to bring both them back. Um, JOK really erupted this year and became the player that I think a lot of fans thought he would be, what they saw at Notre Dame. And when the Browns traded up to get him in the second round, he was, especially at the end of the year, he was shooting gaps and he was tackles for loss. He finished leading the team in tackles and he really thrived in Jim Schwartz's offense. And yet he wasn't playing all three downs for most of the season till really at the near end. And Schwartz says it's about time that he stays on the field every down. And when he did, he just continued to play well. And so I think they'll extend him this year and
Okay.
sign him because he's kind of like a big safety and he needs to be used properly. And you could just see his first couple of years, it just seemed like he wasn't playing fast. It was like he was thinking.
Yep.
I think Jim Schwartz says, you go see the ball and you go get the ball. Wherever the ball, because he was just like shooting out of a cannon. And you could see him early in his career he's a very thoughtful individual. If you ever talk to him in an interview, he's very deep in all this. And I'm not saying, but I can see that he wants to know exactly what I'm supposed to do before I do it. And early in his career, he blew some coverages, cost big plays. And I think he was so worried about making a mistake. And now I think it's just, hey, you see number 8 on Baltimore, wherever he goes, go get the
Yep.
guy. And he was just playing fast and loose. So I think they really feel good about that. And they like to play 5 linemen or 3 corners or 3 safeties. So when you look at all that, a lot of times they were only playing 1 or 2 linebackers. And of course, you need depth,
Yep.
but they don't need the 3 traditional starting linebackers. So I can see him bringing Walker and Taki back with JOK, but within mind, they don't have Walker out there and passing downs. He
Sure.
can't really cover. And Taki's, maybe a liability in that area as well, or not as fast as like a JOK. So they signed, you know, Mohamed Diabate didn't play a lot, but he was a highly regarded undrafted guy who really played well in the preseason, but he didn't play a lot. So they might look at him as a guy. They kept him around and they paid him money to sign with the Browns as a guy they feel that can step in as well. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if Walker and Taki are both back.
Okay. And then we'll wrap up with the secondary. I have to ask you: is Denzel Ward, from the outside perspective, is he overrated?
Well, depends on where you put it. I think he's a shutdown corner
Okay.
in coverage. He's slight in build, and he gets hurt a lot. I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
he's fragile. He just seemed, he's had like 4 concussions, and you start to wonder,
Wow.
where because he got evaluated middle of the season for a concussion, and they ruled it that it was a neck, not as. And a lot of people were wondering, what does this mean if it's like his 5th concussion, like in 3 or 4 years. I think he just needs to learn. Like Deion Sanders really wasn't known for tackling. He just took him by the jersey and wrestled him down. Sometimes Ward tries to stick his nose in there and they just run him over. But I think he's the best corner they have coverage.
Sure.
I don't know if he's the best in the game or where he ranks, but on the Browns he is. And they put him on their top guy. He just needs to be on the field because when he's not on the field, even though they have good depth at corner, they picked on some of the other guys. And you saw it in the playoff game. Greg Newsome was picked on that whole game, and Martin Emerson a little bit. I like Martin Emerson. I think he's moved ahead of Newsom. Newsom is more the third one. He's entering the fifth year of his contract, so they got to decide on picking up his option. He hired Drew Rosenhaus before the season, and there was talk there was only one reason he was doing that, because he wanted to get traded. We had sources at the OBR that said that's what he was mumbling on about. He denied that and he went all over the place. But why would you sign a new agent known for that a year before you can even negotiate? I think it came down, I'm just speculating, that he was being labeled as a slot corner. And a slot corner gets paid about half what a guy
Okay.
like Denzel Ward gets paid. And I think the Browns assured him that we're not looking at you as a slot corner. We just have cornerbacks. That's what I'm thinking, because all of a sudden he was happy and I'm fine. I don't care if they play me in the slot anymore, where he complained about it all the previous year under Joe Woods. So we'll see. I expect them to pick up his option, because Andrew Berry has picked up the option on everybody he's drafted in the first round, like even Jedrick Wills. And then, and I don't mind that, because it's like, unless you know you got a better option, don't move on from somebody ahead of time. With that said, if they could trade him and get a wide receiver or somebody, I could see that happening too.
Okay.
So I think Martin Emerson and Ward are your outside
Yeah.
guys. Emerson is very physical. They like him a lot. He really emerged. It's funny because we talked about him a lot. Our lads had him rated higher than about anybody
Yep.
in the draft. Browns got him in the fifth round. Everybody's got, who is this guy? Well then, he stacked up pretty high. But he has some trouble, getting called for penalties. He gets beat off the ball, and he gets called a lot for defensive holding because they run by him and he grabs them. He's got, you know, I think but again, he was only in his second year. So when you have those three at the top, it's a pretty good room. And then they drafted Cameron Mitchell, who emerged as the fourth one. He was a fifth round pick out of Northwestern. So they feel pretty good about that room. And but they've been adding corners and secondary guys, in the draft, and I think at safety you got free agents last year. Juan Thornhill, he had an underwhelming year, but he had injuries. And Grant Delpit, they signed to an extension, so he had his best year. So those are your safeties.
Yeah.
Rodney McLeod made a big difference as a veteran. I would not be surprised if he came back, because he's one of those 30-something guys, works with Jim Schwartz most of his career. But Ronnie Hickman, undrafted guy, really emerged, from Ohio State, made some big plays. They really like him. So I think the safety room, they feel pretty good about.
Okay. So then, actually, let's just touch up quickly on the special teams. Because Grant's missed the last 2 years, so I don't know. As a free agent, I'm not sure anybody knows what's going on there. But the punter seemed to play well, and he's a free agent. And Hopkins is reliable, at least it appears to be reliable, especially with the Browns. I mean, they could use a reliable kicker. We know that. So, how do they handle those two spots, kick returner and punter?
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate with Grant. They really saw him as the answer, Pro Bowl. He ruptured his Achilles in the preseason, the first year he was signed. And then last year, he was rehabbing all through training camp, and they were saving him for a tune up. And they put him in the final preseason game, opening kickoff against Kansas City. He tore his ACL. And so all the money that his guarantees and everything was really in those 2 years. So again, it's like a Nick Chubb. Okay, now you have a guy in his 30s. He's known for being a jitterbug
Yep.
speedster, 5'6", 170. The reason they put him in there, did he have his speed back? And they felt he did, but you didn't really know. And now he's coming off two major injuries. I don't know if they'll just say, hey, we invite you back, see what you got.
Sure.
But James Prochet, they signed him after they traded Peoples Jones, and he actually probably did the best job punt return since since Barry's been here. But as far as the kick returner, they had Pierre Strong, the running back I talked. Both of them weren't outstanding, so it's going to be interesting. Again, they might choose to draft somebody in a fifth, sixth round, like an undersized wide receiver for that type
Sure.
role. I don't know,
Okay.
but as far as punter, they like Bajorquez a lot. He on the same game that Hopkins pulled his hamstring, he injured his groin when he had to step in and be the kicker. And when he missed a game, they saw it because he was flipping field position. So I think they will try to re-sign him. He likes it here, from what I tell.
Okay.
It'll come down to money and opportunity. Dustin Hopkins was like a godsend to the Browns. They drafted Cade York and they tried and they tried. We watch him in practice. The guy had one of the best legs you'd ever seen. He'd make every kick, but then even in the preseason games, he'd miss one or two. And if he wouldn't have missed one in the final preseason game, they probably would have stuck with him. But then they said, we expect to have a good team. We cannot go into a season with a game on the line and lose a game because the kicker. So
Yep.
they trade Dustin Hopkins, or to get him, who was going to get cut by the Chargers because they decided to keep Cameron Dicker. And that guy was gold. He was 33 of 36. The rap on him was he didn't have that big a leg. He was only 15 of 30 from 50 or more yards. And he was 8 for 8 with the Browns from over 50. And he made a 58-yarder. He won 4 games with game-winning field goals. And you probably know the story, against the Texans in the regular season, Damian Pierce returned to kick 98 yards. Well, Hopkins didn't have a chance to catch him, but he tried to chase him down. He pulled his
Yeah,
hamstring.
that's not
He
good.
did not play the rest of the year,
Yeah.
and even in the playoff games. So they had Riley Patterson, who was cut by the Lions, and he did all right. But there was a lot of confidence. Hopkins was the man in Cleveland. Here's a little tidbit. Everybody knows Jim Brown. In all the seasons, usually the kicker has the most points. Jim Brown had the franchise record for most points in one season, 125. Hopkins had 122 points going into that Texans game.
Wow.
He kicked an extra point and then he pulled his hamstring, never played again.
Wow.
So he would have broken that record that day because the Browns had 6 chances to kick field goals and they went for it on fourth down in that game because they didn't have anybody to kick. And so that's a little trivia. He would have been in his first year the all-time Browns kick
Amazing.
scoring. And yeah, he was just, and he's still under contract, so he will be back. And so the question is, what do they do with Grant? I have no
Sure.
idea, and I had big questions last year. He was 31, and a guy like that, I'm not comparing him, but he's like a Tyreek Hill, little 5'6" 1,
Yes.
and he's just very elusive. And if he's lost any of that, I don't know what
Yeah.
he's going to do, because when they originally signed him, they planned on him being more of a in the offense too, and in the jet sweep,
Yep.
quick rollouts, getting him the ball in space. So it's unfortunate. Last year they extended him, or to bring him back so he had a chance to make the team. I don't know if they can do that again. I guess a lot will come down to what doctors and rehab and all that says.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I know they're competitive, but yeah, quarterbacks and kickers, when you're worried about playing defense, it's like, just don't. Okay, I mean, unless it's the playoffs are on the line or the season's on the line, just don't. Just you're too valuable. Just stay where you're at. I don't care if anybody says, "Oh, you're not, you're being lazy or you're not." Screw them. All right, I'm giving you an order. Don't go after these guys, because this is what happens. You see it happen a lot, and you just can't afford it. It's just because they're just not. That's not what they do. They don't run like that. They don't sprint. And then when you
Yeah,
ask them to sprint,
it didn't cost them a game or anything because Patterson made everything. But
yeah,
in that game against Houston, they were far enough ahead. But yeah, it is. And I think, a former Brown, Andy Lee, was a punter, and he didn't run in a preseason game after a guy on a kick return, and he got cut. And or traded to another team. And
That's up
so
to the coaching staff. Yeah.
I think that comes around to,
Yeah.
the coaching staff and what they tell them.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's why if they say, hey, yeah, I want you to hustle and you get hurt, well, you told me to go after him. So, all right. Let me just wrap up then with the team needs. Let's zero in. And again, it's a guessing game this early, but and again, I'm going to say more towards the draft. So it looks like they definitely offensively, and that's the thing. I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on what they do in free agency, unfortunately, regarding wide receiver, regarding running back. But it does look like offensively, it's possible that they don't spend a lot of high draft picks on offense. I mean, I don't really see it unless they don't go after a veteran wide receiver in free agency or a veteran running back. I'm just going to, so my guess is top offensive need early in the draft, maybe. And I'm saying early, I should say maybe fourth round, fifth round would be running back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's fair. Last year they drafted a quarterback. Everybody's, why are they drafting a quarterback? Because they were wanting to develop long term.
Sure.
And the same thing with DeJuan Jones. They felt like he was the best guy available. He had a second round grade. And they're saying, well, you got enough, but you never have enough.
Yeah.
I still think wide receiver is somebody that, again, if they can make a trade.
Yes.
But last year they added 3 wide receivers. They added, Elijah Moore was the main one, and then they used their top pick on Cedric Tillman, and then they signed Marquise Goodwin as a speed guy. So I still think that they will add to that room. If they can get a front line guy, that might not prohibit them from drafting one in the third round again. But I think this team, their mindset is we have a window right now to win now. We have a quarterback under contract, and we feel we have a roster that can not only go to the playoffs, but can go all the way.
Yep.
So they're not looking, if their highest pick is second round or third round, I don't think they're looking at a guy third round and down that they can count on to instantly put them over the edge. So maybe you can do that with a second round. But I think the trade route or maybe free agency, but wide receiver and running back on offense.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah, and what's key, and by the way, if they wind up cutting Teller, I don't think that's going to happen. Let's say they do, then that becomes a position that they want to definitely get younger at, you would think. But again,
it could be more likely than restructure with him because I think he likes it here, his family and stuff. But he's a target that has a big salary, and I don't know all the grades and stuff, but there's, some that analyze say, well, he dropped off from what he was playing when he got the big contract.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
So I just think, anything can happen, but they're getting more into the mode of win now and take the best available player in the draft. I think short term they address in the free agency, they seem to target 1, 2, 3 guys and go hard after them. Last year they went hard after Hargreaves, and he signed with the 49ers. So that made sense. They signed several defensive tackles on 1-year deals and, went after Dalvin Tomlinson. And, and they got Thornhill, targeted him, went hard after him, and made the trade for Moore. So those are the type of moves that I see them making, and it's hard to know names in that, especially until you see. But right now, their roster, with the guys coming back, they have questions on how good they'll be returning from injury. But they could play. They're ready to fit a team pretty much with what they have coming back because so many guys got to play because of the injuries. So those younger guys, now at least now you have depth and you go, oh, that guy's better than we thought. Or no, he's not as good as we thought. when they never really played
Yep.
before. So there is some silver linings to that.
And by the way, if the Browns do end up using that second round pick on a particular position that could actually help them in 2024, I think it's going to be wide receiver, because this is a very deep class of wide receivers this year in the draft, and there are going to be a lot of quality wide receivers that are going to go in round 2 and even round 3. So if the Browns, and again, who knows what, but based on what we're talking about, I would keep an eye on that. And then on defense, if they don't re-sign Zadarius Smith, you would think that edge is something that they might look at, even though, again, you mentioned Wright and McGuire, good future, but still can never have enough defensive ends, especially in a Schwartz defense. And who knows? Maybe you go after another safety or something like that, a young safety for depth. But this is a team that, again, without the first round draft pick, a lot is going to depend on free agency. So
Yeah, for sure. And like I wouldn't even be surprised a linebacker, because of the guys you mentioned,
yes,
and how they feel. Even if they re-sign Taki and Walker, they're kind of Walker, especially near the end of his career. And he's always been drafting cornerbacks.
true.
So I don't think they feel you have enough of them. I
That's
mean,
right.
he took Newsome, then he took Emerson, then he took Mitchell. They've went a little lower in the draft each, but first time was a first round pick. So a lot depends on what they think of Greg Newsome long term. But yeah, they now can go a lot of directions. But I do think, like you mentioned, like you think of a Zay Flowers. I think, of course, he was a first round pick. But if there's a guy like that could slip down into the second round
Yep.
or even higher up than they're drafting, they could use picks to move up to
True.
get a guy
Yep.
who's more in that mold, that speed, scat back, to give them more speed out there. That's what they wanted with Marquise Goodwin. He's a world class sprinter, but he's 32 now, 33, and he couldn't stay on the field. So if you could get somebody like that to go with Elijah Moore and Cooper, seemed to me like it would make logical sense because Cedric Tillman is a different skill set completely.
And there are a lot of those available in the draft as well. Matter of fact, I even Dave Syvertson, who's the lead scout at our lads, actually started to do some early top five for each position. And when he went over the wide receivers, I actually commented on that myself, talking about how I had a list of about 7, 8 guys who are all undersized receivers that are going to be really capable and looked at from third, fourth, fifth rounds. So yeah, there is a lot of those guys, 5'8", 5'9", 6', 180. A lot of those undersized receivers coming out. That's going to really be plentiful in this year's draft that you want to keep an eye on. So Fitz, right, exactly what you're talking about. One of those guys who can also double as a kick returner. All right, Fred. I can't thank you enough. You're a fountain of information for the Cleveland Browns, and I work closely with Mark Lawrence from Playbook Sports, and he's a big Browns fan, so I'm sure he'll appreciate a video like this, as will all the other Browns fans out there. So thank you for doing this, and I look forward to talking to you again at some point, either just before or after the draft.
Thanks, Greg. It's always fun.